the Couch with Kyle and Lockie.
Today, we'll be hitting up the issue of tobacco and its impact on global health.
Tobacco products are products made entirely or partly of leaf tobacco as a raw material, which are intended to be smoked, sucked, chewed or snuffed. All contain highly addictive psychoactive ingredient nicotine. Tobacco products. There are 1.1 billion tobacco users in the world. This number is expected to increase to 1.6 billion over the next 2 decades. Tobacco products include cigarettes, smokeless tobacco products in 2 general forms, chewing tobacco or snuff, cigars, and pipe tobacco. There are 3 different types of chewing tobacco. They are loose leaf, plug, and twist. Snuff has a finer consistency than chewing tobacco, as it is held in place in the mouth without chewing. Cigarettes. This is a thin cylinder of finely cut tobacco rolled in paper for smoking. Chewing tobacco. This is tobacco that is chewed or held in mouth, typically between the cheeks and gum rather than smoked. Snuff, like chewing tobacco, is made of pulverised tobacco leaves. It is inhaled or snuffed into the nasal cavity, delivering a swift hit of nicotine and a lasting flavoured scent. This is the more of a scent if a flavouring has been blended with the tobacco. Cigars is a cylinder of tobacco rolled in tobacco leaves for smoking. Pipe tobacco. A tobacco pipe, often called a pipe, this is a device specifically made to smoke tobacco. It comprises a chamber, the bowl, for the tobacco, for which a thin, hollow stem, the shank, emerges, ending in the mouthpiece, the bite.
Risk factors. So we've got a little stat down the bottom here. 1 person dies every 6 seconds from a tobacco-related disease. Tobacco use is one of the main risk factors for a number of chronic diseases, including cancer, lung diseases, and cardiovascular disease. Cancer includes cancer of the lung, larynx, mouth, esophagus, throat, bladder, and many more. Lung diseases, cardiovascular diseases like damaged blood vessel walls, which makes it less stiff and less elastic, disturb normal heartbeat rhythms, increase blood pressure and heart rate. Despite this, it is still common throughout the world. A number of countries have legislation restricting tobacco advertising and regulating who can buy and use tobacco products and where people can smoke. So up on the board now, we have a great example of a non-smoker's heart, which is on the right, compared to a healthy non-smoker's heart, which is on the left. Following on from the heart comparison, this is the difference between a non-smoker's lungs compared to a smoker's lungs.
Secondhand smoke. Globally, the latest World Health Organization estimates there are 40% of children, 33% of non-smoking adult males, and 35% of non-smoking adult females are exposed to secondhand smoke. Of 600,000 global deaths attributable to secondhand smoke, 28% occur in children and 47% in women. Exposure to secondhand smoke most commonly occurs in home, workplace and public areas. Infant children, pregnant women and fetuses are at particularly high risk from secondhand smoke. It can damage the heart and blood vessels of people who don't smoke. It raises the risk of coronary heart disease, damages heart tissue, lowers high density lipoprotein cholesterol, and raises blood pressure. What is in a cigarette? Tobacco smoke contains over 4,000 chemicals. Throughout the next two slides, you can see there are many chemicals in cigarettes. There are acetone, solvent, methanol, used in rocket fuel, nicotine, used as a herbicide or an insecticide, cadmium, used in batteries, carbon monoxide, in exhaust fumes, vinyl chloride, used in plastic materials, DDT, insecticide, polonium-210, a radioactive element, and aranasic, lethal poison, and chlorhydric acid, which is used in gas chambers, just to name a few.
So, just going off that list, you can see how toxic a cigarette can be and how bad it can be to an individual's health, hence why it's such an important topic in the health of the population. And they're just some of the references we use for section 1. Alright, so now we're going to look at the effects of tobacco on the population. A nice little stat down the bottom here. Over 20% of all deaths in the US are from tobacco, which is a pretty alarming rate. So global health. Tobacco use in any form is dangerous, as stated on previous slides, and it is the single greatest preventable cause of death. In 2014, tobacco use killed almost 6 million people, with nearly 80% of these deaths occurring in low and middle income countries. This number of deaths includes 600,000 from secondhand smoke. More than half of all tobacco users will ultimately die of a tobacco-related illness, and men and women with comparable smoking patterns exhibit similar rates of tobacco-related health. Unless urgent action is taken, more than 8 million people will die annually from tobacco by the year 2030. Tobacco caused 100 million deaths during the 20th century, and if current trends continue, about 1 billion people will die during the 21st century from tobacco. Yet, tobacco-related deaths are entirely preventable. So, shown on the graph here is the global deaths caused by tobacco. The World Health Survey. The World Health Survey conducted a study from 48 low-income and middle-income countries to explore the impact of demographic and socio-economic factors on the current smoking status of respondents. The study concluded that individuals were more likely to smoke if they had little or no education, regardless of if they were male or female or lived in a low or middle income country. Tobacco smoking is a leading cause of premature death and disability, and over 80% of the world's smokers live in these low or middle income countries. In many countries, tobacco users who die prematurely deprive their families of income, raise the cost of healthcare, and hinder economic development. Hence why so much action has been taken to slow down the use of tobacco, particularly in countries like ours, Australia. For many residents in countries like Australia, it might be easy to say that tobacco use is gradually declining year after year, and they are right. However, this is not the case all over the world. Consumption of tobacco products is increasing globally, unfortunately, even though it is decreasing in some high income and upper middle income countries. So, shown on the graph here, we see that nearly 2/3 of the world's smokers live in these 10 countries: China, India, Indonesia, Russia, America, Japan, Brazil, Turkey, Germany, and Bangladesh. Alarmingly, almost 1/3 of these smokers live in China, so maybe that's why China has such poor air quality.
In Australian people 14 years or older living in areas with the lowest socio-economic status, were 3 times more likely to smoke daily than people with the highest socio-economic status, 19.9% compared to 6.7%. But there were significant declines in daily smoking in both these groups between 2010 and 2013. So on the graph here, it shows the smoking prevalence among disadvantaged groups, such as the unemployed, Aboriginal people, people with mental illness, low-income single parents, vulnerable young people, homelessness, people in prisons, and people who inject drugs. Indigenous and Torres Strait Islanders. This graph showed on the slideshow shows the percentage of people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians that are tobacco users. There are 19% of Indigenous 15 to 17-year-olds that are smokers, and this is a very alarming statistic, as no one under 18 are allowed to purchase cigarettes in Australia. 54% of 25 to 34-year-old Indigenous Australians are tobacco smokers, with 46% of 18 to 24-year-old people participate in smoking. As you can see there, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a higher rate of tobacco smoking compared to non-Indigenous Australians.
Yeah, so as a result of this, you can probably point out that Aboriginal health is going to be quite significantly lower, so it's going to reduce their overall life expectancy and increase their burden of disease. So it's something maybe the government needs to start cracking down on, which they already have through plain packaging and increasing prices. So now we move on to socio-economic status. The declines in daily smoking seen nationally were also seen among employed people, but there were no significant changes in the smoking behaviour of unemployed people who were unable to work between 2010 and 2013. So this obviously made them go down in their socio-economic status. So the graph on the screen showing here the lowest socio-economic status group, which is the first quintile, 23% prevalence of smoking, so it's quite high compared to the higher socio-economic status, which is 10%. Reasons for this could be a better education for those in the higher socio-economic status, so they know more of the risks that are involved, possibly better healthcare systems. There's probably a few other reasons, but yeah, the lower socio-economic status group probably don't have the best education they could possibly get, and their healthcare is quite lower than the higher socio-economic groups. And there's some of the references we use for section 2.
Overall, whether or not a person chooses to smoke may be determined by many factors, such as socio-economic context, working conditions, where one lives, availability of tobacco products, whether one has peers or family members who smoke, or even the level of cultural acceptance in smoking. For example, women in Southeast Asia traditionally have a very low level of smoking, and in this area is not a social norm for women to smoke. So Kyle, as we've been presenting, David, we've had a couple of listeners email into us asking a few questions, so I thought we'd better answer them, keep the listeners happy. So how can countries go about decreasing tobacco use like in Australia?
Well, I believe other countries that tobacco use is increasing, for example China, need to look at making it an important issue for them to try to decrease tobacco use in their country. There are many ways that other countries, and even Australia, to do a little more to decrease tobacco use, like upping prices of tobacco, making the packaging like Australia with negative pictures on them, banning the use of them in public places, and even go to the extremes and make them illegal. But then that'll cause some great debate. Between 1990 and 2009, cigarette consumption decreased by 26% in Western Europe, but increased by 57% in Africa and the Middle East. There are positive signs in some countries, although there are more and more of an increase of tobacco use in third world countries. So there's another
question here for you, Lockie, that you can answer for us. Hey guys, do you know much about how much money is spent on tobacco prevention in the world?
And that's by Flynn, is it?
Yeah, Flynn.
See.
Yep.
Thanks for sending in that question, Flynn. Really appreciate it. So there needs to be more tobacco preventions in the world, although it is up to governments to find funding to health prevention agencies, and this is not only in Australia. It is important for overseas countries to start more prevention for use of tobacco. The tobacco industry revenue was $744 billion in 2014. Absolutely crazy. That is more than the gross domestic product of all but 18 countries. Unbelievable. I'm not sure about the world, but America is a prime example of money getting spent on tobacco prevention. There is, in America, $320.3 million on tobacco generated revenue compared to $57.2 million recommended spending on tobacco prevention, and the actual spending on tobacco prevention was $2.1 million. This just shows the carelessness of governments not giving enough care in trying to prevent tobacco smoking in the country. So there you go, Flynn. Answered that one for you. And thank you guys for listening in to On the Couch with Kyle and Lockie. Thanks, Kyle, for joining us.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Cheers.